The mysterious signal. The galaxy was quiet. After centuries of conflict, war had become something distant, almost forgotten. The universe had entered an uneasy peace. Humanity, once the underdog in the cosmic battle, had risen to become a force to be reckoned with. But peace does not last forever. Somewhere, deep in the dark expanse of space, a call was about to be made. A call that would stir the most powerful warriors the galaxy had ever known. On the edge of human space, near the borders of unexplored territory, something strange happened. An ancient communications beacon, long abandoned, suddenly flickered to life. The signal was weak, faint, but it carried a message. It wasn't just any message, it was a command, a call to arms. It didn't belong to any known species or civilization. It was as if someone, or something, had been waiting, watching, and finally decided it was time to act. The signal was intercepted by human ships, but they couldn't trace its origin. It was encrypted with codes that no one recognized, using language no one could understand. The few who tried to decode it failed, and soon, the message was handed to those who knew how to handle the unknown. Humanity's greatest warriors, the Deathworlders. Deathworlders were no ordinary soldiers. They were born on planets known for their extreme conditions, planets where the very environment was deadly. They had fought through battles, both against hostile alien species and the savage wilderness of their own worlds. They were the strongest, the fiercest, and the most resilient warriors the universe had ever known. When they were called to fight, the galaxy trembled. The mysterious signal reached the Deathworlders on their remote bases, scattered across the galaxy. They didn't need to understand the message completely. The command was clear: prepare for war. A battle was coming, and it was unlike any other they had faced. One by one, the warriors began to gather. Some were stationed on distant worlds. Others had retired to quiet corners of space. The call to arms roused them from their peace, and they began to assemble, preparing for a fight. But the strange thing was, no one knew who or what they were fighting. In the command center of the human fleet, Admiral Sarah Lockhart stood in front of the massive holographic map of the galaxy. She studied the signal, her brow furrowed with confusion. Where did this come from? She muttered to herself. The map zoomed in on the location of the signal. A tiny, uncharted star system on the edge of human space. It was a place that no one had dared to explore, a place where even the most fearless explorers had turned back. "Admiral," a voice called from behind. Sarah turned to see Captain James Harker, one of the senior Deathworlder leaders, standing in the doorway. "We're ready. The warriors are assembling. They're waiting for your orders." Sarah nodded. "We can't ignore this. The message is clear, even if we don't understand it yet. Whatever it is, it's drawing them in. And I'm not about to send them into unknown danger without knowing who or what we're up against." Captain Harker stepped forward, his eyes sharp. "With all due respect, Admiral, the Deathworlders don't need to know everything to fight. We've faced worse. We were born for this." Sarah's eyes met his. There was a fire in his gaze, a determination that spoke volumes. She knew the Deathworlders were built for war, but this was different. They had fought in battles before, but this time, they didn't know who their enemy was or why they were being called into action. Something didn't sit right with her. "I don't doubt that," she replied. "But we need information. We need to know what's out there. Who's sending this signal? Why now?" The silence in the room grew heavy. The Deathworlders, no strangers to danger, stood ready. But the mystery was too great. It wasn't just a battle call. It was an invitation to war, a war whose purpose no one understood. And yet, the warriors didn't hesitate. They had never feared the unknown. The call had been made, and they would answer it, whatever the cost. Far across the galaxy, deep in the forgotten corners of space, something watched. Something ancient, something powerful. It had been waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, the moment had arrived. The call had been sent, and the Deathworlders were rising to meet it. As the human fleet prepared to venture into the unknown, the tension in the air was palpable. The warriors stood tall, armored in their battle gear, ready for whatever challenge awaited them. Some knew that their strength, their skill, their very existence was tied to this moment. The signal was not just a call to war, it was a test of their survival, their resolve, and their ability to rise against the forces that would seek to destroy them. The Deathworlders were ready for war, but they were also prepared for something far more dangerous, the unknown. What lay beyond the stars was a mystery, and they would uncover it soon enough. But one thing was certain, their lives would never be the same again. And so, the first step of the greatest battle humanity had ever faced began with a simple message: prepare for war. The first encounter, the human fleet, carrying the Deathworlders and their allies, approached the uncharted star system, their ship engines humming with the low, rhythmic pulse of anticipation. Every warrior aboard the fleet was silent, their minds focused on the unknown ahead. The signal had drawn them in, but now, with each passing moment, the silence of space felt heavier. The air was thick with uncertainty. Admiral Sarah Lockhart stood at the command deck, her fingers tightly gripping the edges of the control panel. She could feel the weight of the moment, the decision that would alter the course of history. The Deathworlders, ever vigilant, stood by her side. They were ready to engage in battle, but something told her this wasn't going to be like anything they had faced before. As the fleet entered the star system, the stars around them seemed to flicker and fade, swallowed by an unnatural darkness. The uncharted planet they were heading towards was shrouded in a thick, swirling mist. Its surface was hidden, its atmosphere toxic to most life forms. The Deathworlders, however, were not like other beings. They had evolved to survive the harshest conditions. But the planet was more than just a hostile environment. It radiated an unsettling energy, as though the planet itself was alive. "We're in position, Admiral." Captain Harker's voice broke through the silence. His tone was steady, but Sarah could hear the tension beneath his words. The unknown was always more dangerous when you didn't understand it. "Send a recon team down," she ordered. "We need eyes on the ground before we make any moves." Captain Harker nodded and turned to the warriors behind him. Without hesitation, they suited up in their combat armor and made their way to the dropships. They were fearless, their reputation among the stars as legendary as it was terrifying. The Deathworlders were the galaxy's greatest warriors, but this mission felt different. The unknown seemed to be waiting for them, pulling them in. The recon team descended into the swirling mist, their dropships cutting through the thick atmosphere. They landed with a thud on the surface, the ground beneath them cold and unyielding. As the team exited the ships, their weapons drawn, they spread out in search of any signs of life, or anything that could explain the mysterious signal. The air was thick with tension, and the silence was deafening. Nothing moved. No sounds of wildlife, no wind, no hum of energy. Just an eerie stillness that seemed to settle deep within their bones. The warriors scanned the environment, their senses heightened, ready for whatever might emerge. Then they found it. A massive structure hidden beneath the fog. It was ancient, far older than anything humanity had ever encountered. The architecture was unlike anything they had ever seen, alien, yet somehow familiar. The walls were covered in strange symbols that seemed to shift as the warriors approached. The structure itself pulsed with a low, vibrating hum, as though it were alive. "Captain, you need to see this," one of the warriors called into the comms. Captain Harker didn't waste a second. He and a handful of other Deathworlders made their way to the site. The moment they reached the structure, they were struck by the sheer size of it. It was a monument, but it wasn't just any monument. It was something ancient, something that had been waiting for them. The energy from the structure was almost palpable, like a magnetic pull drawing them closer. As they explored the exterior of the structure, they found an entrance, an archway that seemed to open of its own accord. They hesitated for only a moment before stepping through, weapons raised, eyes scanning every corner of the dark, vast chamber beyond. Inside, the air was thick with energy. The walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols, and at the center of the room stood a massive device, its purpose unclear. It hummed with power, and as the team ventured closer, the symbols on the walls seemed to react to their presence. The entire structure seemed to wake up, as if recognizing the warriors. "We need to get out of here," one of the Deathworlders muttered. His instincts were sharp, and they all felt it. The building wasn't just a monument, it was a trap. Before they could retreat, the device in the center of the room activated. The entire chamber lit up, the symbols glowing brighter, and the energy field surrounding them intensified. A deep, rumbling voice echoed through the room, an alien language that none of them understood. Yet somehow, they could feel the meaning behind the words. It was an order, a command. "Move!" Captain Harker shouted, and the Deathworlders sprang into action, retreating toward the entrance, but the structure was shifting around them. The walls closed in, and a blast of energy shot from the device, striking the warriors and sending them flying backward. In the chaos, they barely managed to escape the structure. Their drop ships waited, engines humming with the promise of a swift departure. But as they lifted off, looking back at the dark silhouette of the structure, they knew one thing for certain. Whatever had sent that signal was waiting for them, and the battle had only just begun. Back aboard the fleet, Admiral Lockhart was already preparing for the next move. The recon team had uncovered more than they had bargained for. The signal had led them to something ancient, something far beyond their understanding. And now, they had to face it. The Deathworlders were ready, but the true enemy, the one that had sent the call to arms, was still a mystery. And that mystery was growing more dangerous by the minute. The truth behind the call. The fleet hovered in orbit around the mysterious planet, the Deathworlders aboard their ships restless and uneasy. Despite their unmatched combat prowess and fearsome reputations, they were beginning to feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. The structures they had discovered on the surface were ancient, and the energy they had encountered felt unnatural. Something was waiting for them, something more powerful than anything they had ever faced. Admiral Sarah Lockhart stood on the bridge, staring at the data streams pouring in from the recon mission. The more they analyzed the signal, the more questions arose. Every piece of information brought new layers of complexity, and with each layer, the mystery deepened. The signal wasn't a simple call to war. It was a beacon, a trap, and it had been waiting for them, drawing them in like moths to a flame. "This doesn't add up," Sarah muttered under her breath, reviewing the data. "Why us? Why now? Who would send a message like that to us? It's not just a warning. It's an invitation." The words hung in the air, heavy with the implications. Someone, or something, had orchestrated this entire situation. The Deathworlders weren't just being drawn into a battle. They were being set up. And the question was why. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities, but none of them made sense. Whoever was behind this was powerful, intelligent, and patient enough to manipulate events from the shadows. The game had already started, and they had walked right into the trap. Captain Harker stood beside her, his eyes focused on the holographic map of the planet. He had been part of the recon team, and even though he had seen the structure firsthand, he was still processing what they had uncovered. "I've been thinking about it, Admiral," Harker said, his voice grim. "The signal was sent for a reason. It was calling us, not just to fight, but to do something specific. The symbols we found on the structure, there was a pattern to them, something almost like a key." Sarah turned toward him. "A key to what?" "I'm not sure," Harker replied. "But I feel like the structure was designed to manipulate us, to get us to uncover something hidden. It wasn't just a trap to lure us in, it was a test." Sarah's mind whirled with the implications. If the Deathworlders had been tested, then the rest of humanity had been too. This wasn't just a battle, it was something far more dangerous. They were walking into the heart of an ancient conspiracy, and they didn't even know who their real enemy was yet. Suddenly, the comms officer spoke up, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. "Admiral, we've detected a massive energy spike in the vicinity of the structure. It's coming from below the surface, deep within the planet." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "What's happening?" "We don't know yet, but it's getting stronger. We might be looking at some kind of weapon or power source," the officer responded. "We've also detected several unidentified vessels entering the system. They're not broadcasting any identification codes." The word sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Unidentified vessels meant only one thing: enemies, and in this case, they could be anyone, anything. The Deathworlders had been brought here under the false pretense of a simple call to arms, but now it seemed like a far more complex web was being spun around them. The real battle was just beginning. "Prepare the fleet," Sarah ordered. "We're not waiting any longer. It's time to confront whatever this is, but we're going in with eyes wide open." The Deathworlders moved into action, the fleet preparing for an engagement unlike anything they had ever experienced. The unknown ships approached with alarming speed, their intentions unclear, but the Deathworlders were unshaken. Their reputation was built on facing down the unimaginable, and they would not falter now. As the fleet moved closer to the surface of the planet, the massive energy pulse continued to grow, emanating from deep within the planet. The power behind it felt ancient, as though the planet itself were alive, watching them. The structures on the surface seemed to tremble in response, their once dormant symbols now glowing brighter, almost as if they were awakening to the arrival of the fleet. "We've got incoming," Harker said, his voice steady. "Enemy ships are closing in fast. They're preparing to engage." Sarah watched as the enemy vessels came into view, their sleek, alien shapes unmistakable. They were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. Unfamiliar designs, strange technology, and weapons that pulsed with energy, ready to strike. These ships weren't just advanced. They were ancient, just like the planet beneath them. "They knew we were coming," Sarah said quietly. "They knew everything." The realization hit her like a slap. The signal, the trap, the tests, it had all been carefully orchestrated. The enemy wasn't just trying to start a war. They had been preparing for this moment for centuries. The Deathworlders were not the only ones who had been waiting. The ancient forces behind the signal had known that humanity would rise, and they had set the stage for this confrontation long before the first shot was fired. The battle was inevitable, but now it was clear that it was more than just a fight for survival. It was a struggle for the future of the galaxy. And Sarah knew, deep in her gut, that the Deathworlders were the galaxy's last hope. As the enemy ships fired their first volley, the Deathworlders returned fire, their ships dancing through space, their weapons slicing through the void. The battle had begun in earnest. But for all the destruction, all the chaos, one question remained: who was truly behind the call, and why had they chosen now to make their move? The battle begins. The first salvo from the enemy ships lit up the blackness of space, a brilliant streak of fire that cut through the darkness like a warning. The human fleet, led by the Deathworlders, was ready, but even they hadn't fully anticipated the sheer ferocity of the alien forces they now faced. The enemy ships were fast, agile, and heavily armed, their weapons firing with a deadly precision that caught the humans off guard. All ships returned fire. Admiral Lockhart's voice rang out, calm but filled with determination. The battle had begun. The Deathworlders, their battle instincts honed over years of combat in hostile environments, reacted instantly. Their ships, designed for speed and resilience, darted through the chaos, weaving between enemy fire as if they were born to fight in the stars. They returned fire with devastating efficiency, their weapons tearing through the alien vessels with terrifying force. Captain Harker, aboard his own ship, barked orders to his crew. Focus on their lead ship. Take it down before they regroup. The Deathworlder warriors aboard the ships followed his orders without hesitation. They were not just soldiers. They were hunters, and they saw the enemy ships as nothing more than prey. Each move they made was calculated, precise, and deadly. But despite their superior combat skills, the Deathworlders were up against something they had never encountered before. An enemy who fought with intelligence and strategy, rather than brute force alone. The alien ships moved as a coordinated unit, dodging and weaving in unison, creating a defensive web that made it hard to land a blow. It was as if the ships were linked in some way, responding to each other's movements with uncanny precision. "Captain, they're adapting," one of the crew members shouted. "They're learning from our tactics." Harker's face tightened. "Then we'll have to outsmart them." The battle raged on, the space around them turning into a chaotic, violent dance. Lasers and plasma bolts flew in every direction, exploding in bright flashes of light as ships collided, their hulls torn apart by the ferocity of the combat. The Deathworlders, masters of survival and war, fought with relentless fury, but the unknown enemy proved to be an equal match. Meanwhile, on the planet's surface, the battle wasn't just being fought in the skies. The ancient structure they had discovered earlier seemed to pulse with energy, as though it were feeding off the chaos in space above. The strange symbols on its walls flickered like flames in the wind, and the ground itself trembled beneath the feet of the warriors who had landed there. "We've got to stop whatever's happening down here," one of the Deathworlders shouted as they advanced toward the structure. "This isn't just a weapon, it's something more." The Deathworlders moved quickly, their weapons raised, eyes scanning for any signs of danger. They had been sent here to secure the site, but with the battle raging above and the structure seemingly coming to life, they knew they were running out of time. Back in space, the tide of the battle began to shift. The Deathworlders, used to being outnumbered, were pushing the enemy back, their superior tactics and firepower beginning to take a toll. The alien ships, despite their advanced technology, were starting to show signs of vulnerability. The Deathworlders had found a weakness. "Now's our chance," Captain Harker yelled. "Push forward. Take them out." The fleet surged forward, the Deathworlder ships closing in on the remaining enemy vessels. It was a fight they had fought countless times before, but with each passing moment, it felt more personal. This was no ordinary enemy. There was something about them, something deeper, more dangerous, that made this battle feel like it was about more than just winning. Admiral Lockhart watched the battle unfold from the bridge of her ship, her eyes scanning the situation. The Deathworlders were pushing the aliens back, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were only scratching the surface of the true threat. "Captain, what's happening on the ground?" she asked, her voice laced with urgency. "We're moving toward the structure," Harker replied. "But it's not just a building. It's a weapon, or at least, it's linked to something far greater. We need to shut it down before it's too late." As the battle continued, both in space and on the ground, the Deathworlders pushed forward, determined to break the enemy's grip on the galaxy. But the deeper they delved into the mystery, the more questions arose. Who had built the structure? Why had they chosen this moment to awaken it? And most importantly, what was the true purpose of the signal that had called them here? Admiral Lockhart's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, sharp voice from the comms officer. "Admiral, we've just detected a massive energy surge from the surface of the planet. It's coming from the structure." The energy wave blasted out, sending shockwaves through space. The entire fleet rocked under the impact, and for a moment, it seemed like the enemy had regained the upper hand. The Deathworlder ships reeled, their systems flickering as the energy disrupted their technology. But the Deathworlders were not so easily defeated. Despite the blast, they regained their composure, their determination unwavering. They pressed on, their ships darting between explosions, firing on all cylinders. "This isn't just about us anymore," Sarah said quietly, her voice filled with realization. "The fate of the galaxy is on the line. If we don't stop whatever's happening down there, we could all be doomed." The battle was far from over. As the Deathworlders closed in on their targets, The true nature of the threat remained hidden, but it was growing clearer by the second. Whatever had called them here, whatever had awakened the ancient structure beneath the planet's surface, was far more powerful than anyone had anticipated. And as the Deathworlders pressed forward, the first true test of their survival was just beginning. The real battle, the one for the galaxy's future, was yet to come. Human strategy revealed. The space battle was reaching its peak. The Deathworlders, despite the constant barrage of fire from the alien fleet, were pushing forward. Their ships, designed for resilience, had begun to adapt to the enemy's tactics, finding weaknesses where there had been none before. The enemy, once unified and highly coordinated, was starting to show signs of disarray. Their vessels began to scatter as the Deathworlders pressed the attack, targeting critical systems and taking down ships one by one. But as the battle raged, Sarah Lockhart, standing at the bridge of her flagship, couldn't shake the feeling that the true fight hadn't even begun. The enemy fleet was clearly advanced, but it lacked the same adaptability the Deathworlders had developed over generations of war. And that's when it hit her. Humanity's greatest strength was not just their power or technology, but their ability to learn, to evolve in the face of adversity. "We're not just fighting these ships," Sarah muttered under her breath, looking at the swirling chaos of explosions and flashing lights on the holographic display. "We're outsmarting them." On the ground, the Deathworlders had secured the perimeter around the massive structure. The alien energy field had flared to life once again, pulsing with power. It had been pushing them back, but they hadn't given up. The Deathworlders, led by Captain Harker, advanced toward the heart of the structure. They had learned from their previous encounters. The structure was not just a weapon. It was part of a much larger plan, and now they needed to disable it before it could unleash its full power. "Hold the line, men," Captain Harker shouted. "We've been through worse than this. Let's finish what we started." The warriors, never ones to back down from a challenge, fought through the overwhelming energy pulse, each step taking them closer to the structure's core. They were battered and bruised, their weapons glowing with the heat of battle, but they pressed forward with a single-minded focus. As they neared the central chamber, they discovered something they hadn't anticipated: a massive energy conduit stretching from the structure deep into the planet's core. It was feeding the alien technology, amplifying the power of the weapon. "This is it," one of the Deathworlders said, a grim determination in his voice. "If we shut this down, we might be able to disable the entire structure." Harker nodded. "Do it. We don't have much time." Meanwhile, in space, the Deathworlders continued to apply pressure on the alien fleet. They had learned that the enemy ships were not designed for prolonged combat. They were swift, but their weapons systems lacked the stamina and power needed for a sustained battle. The Deathworlders used this to their advantage, leading the enemy into traps, turning their own tactics against them. They knew that their true advantage wasn't in sheer firepower. It was in their ability to think on their feet, to adapt when faced with unexpected challenges. One by one, enemy ships fell. The Deathworlder ships were relentless, coordinating with one another like a well-oiled machine. Captain Harker, watching from the surface through the fleet's communication systems, knew they were turning the tide. The enemy's lines were beginning to fracture. "Admiral, we've got them on the run," Captain Harker's voice came through the comms. "But we still need to deal with that energy core. If it's not shut down soon, it will unleash everything it's been building up." "We'll handle it up here," Sarah responded. "Just get it done." Back on the surface, the team of Deathworlders was positioned around the energy core, their weapons aimed at any signs of enemy movement. The conduit was humming with power, its pulse growing louder and more erratic by the second. It was clear the structure was preparing for something catastrophic, something that could destroy everything in its path. But as the warriors moved into position to disable the core, they encountered one last obstacle. The structure's defenses activated. Alien sentries, hidden deep within the walls, emerged in a flurry of energy and metal. These sentries were unlike anything the Deathworlders had faced before. Their sheer size and power rivaled that of the warriors themselves. They fought with a cold, calculating precision that put even the Deathworlders' experience to the test. "We've got company," one of the warriors shouted. "They're not going down easily." Despite the surprise attack, the Deathworlders fought back with all the skill and tenacity they had. Blades clashed with armor, and energy weapons lit up the chamber as they took on the sentries. The battle was fierce, but the warriors never faltered. Their survival instincts kicked in, and they began to systematically dismantle the sentries, one by one. "We need to shut it down now," Harker growled, his voice edged with urgency. One of the Deathworlders, a tech specialist, moved quickly to the energy conduit, hacking into its control systems. The device resisted at first, its security protocols fighting back with intense energy feedback, but the warriors' determination never wavered. Slowly, the device began to power down. In space, the fleet had nearly wiped out the remaining enemy vessels, but Sarah knew they couldn't afford to let up. The enemy had been beaten, but the true nature of the threat was still present. If the energy core was not completely disabled, there was no telling what kind of devastation it could unleash. Finally, the pulse from the structure began to wane, its energy field flickering like a dying star. The Deathworlders had done it. The core was offline. "This is Admiral Lockhart," Sarah said into the comms. "The enemy has been neutralized, and the structure has been shut down. We've won." But even as she said the words, Sarah knew this victory came with a price. The Deathworlders had proven themselves once again, their adaptability and intelligence giving them the edge in battle. But as the dust settled, she couldn't help but wonder what had truly been behind this attack, and what would the future hold now that the galaxy's most powerful warriors had emerged victorious once again. The answers were still out there, lurking in the shadows. But for now, humanity and the Deathworlders had earned a moment of peace, at least until the next challenge arose. The ultimate showdown. The victory in space, and on the surface, was hard-won, but the Deathworlders, despite their triumph, could feel a gnawing uncertainty growing within them. The battle was over, but the enemy had been but one part of a much larger and more insidious plan. The energy core beneath the planet had been neutralized, and the enemy fleet lay shattered in space, but something still lingered in the air, a sense that the true war had not yet begun. Captain Harker stood at the head of the gathered warriors, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The ancient structure now lay dormant, its eerie hum silenced. But he knew better than anyone that these ruins hid secrets deeper than they appeared. They had faced this enemy before, but it was clear the galaxy's most dangerous conflict had just begun. This was not just about a battle for survival. This was the beginning of something much larger. "We've only won the first round," Harker said, his voice steady and low. "There's more to this than we know. We can't afford to rest on our laurels." Admiral Sarah Lockhart, standing beside him, felt the weight of his words. The Deathworlders were always on edge, always prepared for the next fight, but she had seen something in their eyes that morning, a shared recognition that they were no longer just fighting for their homes or their way of life. Now they were fighting for the future of the galaxy itself. "Agreed," Sarah replied, her tone unwavering. "But we need answers. We've dismantled the core, but that energy surge, it came from somewhere. We can't just walk away and assume it's over. We're missing something, and I intend to find out what." Her words echoed in the hearts of the Deathworlders. This wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about understanding the forces that had set everything in motion. The silence that followed was broken only by the faint hum of the ships overhead, the survivors of the battle regaining their footing. But as Sarah and Harker stood there, the quiet was interrupted by a sudden, sharp flash of light from deep within the planet's surface. "What the hell was that?" one of the warriors asked, his hand instinctively gripping his weapon. Another flash, this time accompanied by a low, rumbling tremor, rippled through the ground beneath them. The sky above darkened, as if some great power was awakening beneath the planet. It was as if the planet itself was reacting to something far more sinister than they had anticipated. "Get to the ships. Now," Captain Harker barked. "We're not done yet." In a flash, the Deathworlders scrambled to their ships. The sudden eruption of energy from the planet's core was like a warning. Something had been disturbed, and it wasn't going to go down quietly. As they lifted off, Sarah's eyes were glued to the surface below. The ground was splitting apart in jagged lines, like a wound being torn open by unseen hands. Massive bursts of energy shot into the sky, and a dark vortex began to form above the planet. The battle was not over. In fact, it was only escalating. "Admiral," the comms officer shouted over the intercom, "we've got multiple unidentified energy readings. They're coming from within the planet." Sarah's heart sank. "Brace for impact. Prepare for another assault. This is no longer just a skirmish. It's a war for survival." The fleet, now back in space, was immediately on high alert. The enemy might have been defeated in the previous battle, but the real enemy, whatever had been hidden beneath the surface, was now beginning to make its presence felt. As the dark vortex above the planet's surface grew, so did the intensity of the energy pulses. It became clear now that the planet's true secret was being unleashed. The Deathworlders had only seen the surface of the battle. What lay hidden beneath was something far worse. Then, from the heart of the vortex, a new fleet emerged, an enormous armada, unlike anything the Deathworlders had seen. Massive ships, each one glowing with an otherworldly energy, began to emerge from the swirling storm. Their design was alien, ancient, and terrifying. These were no simple warships. They were weapons, constructed for one thing only: destruction. "They were waiting for us," Sarah said, her voice grim. "This was never just about one small battle. They were setting us up for something bigger, and now they're ready to finish what they started." The Deathworlders, realizing the true magnitude of the threat they faced, readied their ships once again. Their hearts pounded with the thrill of battle, but this time the stakes were different. This wasn't about just survival. It was about saving the galaxy itself. The fleet launched into action, prepared to fight to the last. The Deathworlders had faced insurmountable odds before, but this was something new. This was the ultimate test. As the alien armada approached, a fierce battle erupted, the space around them erupting with flashes of energy, explosions, and the deafening roar of war. Captain Harker's voice came through the comms. "Hold the line. Do not let them pass." The ships clashed in a spectacular display of combat. The Deathworlders fought with everything they had, their ships darting in and out of the chaos, hitting the enemy's weak points, targeting their weapons, and trying to break through their defenses. But the alien armada was relentless. They had learned from their previous encounters, and their overwhelming numbers began to push the human fleet back. But then Sarah realized something. The alien armada was powerful, yes, but it was not invincible. The Deathworlders, having been trained for the toughest of environments, had one thing that their enemies lacked: adaptability. The Deathworlders were able to predict the enemy's movements, anticipate their tactics, and turn the tide. Slowly but surely, they began to weaken the armada's formation, breaking apart their defense lines. "We can do this," Harker shouted. "We've fought harder battles. This is just another step in our victory." And as the battle raged on, it became clear that the Deathworlders would not back down. They would fight until the last ship was standing, no matter the cost. The ultimate showdown had begun. The galaxy's fate hung in the balance, and the Deathworlders were ready to face it head-on. The war won, but at what cost? The battle stretched on for what felt like an eternity. The Deathworlders fought with relentless determination, their ships moving like deadly predators in the vastness of space, tearing into the alien armada with every strike. The sky itself seemed to crackle with energy as explosions rippled across the cosmos, the once unyielding enemy slowly beginning to falter. Admiral Sarah Lockhart stood at the command center, her eyes scanning the battlefield. The Deathworlders were pushing back the enemy, their relentless assault breaking the alien armada's formation. But even in the face of victory, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The fight was far from over, but the victory, if it came, would have a steep cost. "Admiral," the comms officer called, "we've got a report from the surface team. The structure is destabilizing. It's a ticking clock down there. They're still trying to get it fully deactivated." Sarah nodded, her heart heavy. "We can't let the enemy regain control of the planet. If that structure powers up again, everything we've fought for will be for nothing." Back on the surface, Captain Harker and his team were pushing forward toward the final piece of the puzzle, the core of the ancient structure. The alien forces had fallen back, but not without leaving their mark. The Deathworlders had suffered losses. Warriors lay scattered, some alive but wounded, others who would never rise again. It was always the price of war, but it still left a bitter taste in their mouths. Harker's breath was heavy in his chest as he approached the heart of the structure, the device that had been causing so much destruction. It pulsed with energy, and although its power had waned, the structure itself was not yet fully neutralized. They had to deactivate it, or they risked everything. "Move in," Harker ordered, his voice resolute. The warriors at his back, despite their exhaustion, pushed forward with the same ferocity they had shown since the beginning. Their enemies might have been defeated, but the real battle, the one for the future, was far from over. As they moved deeper into the core chamber, the last remnants of the alien forces they had fought alongside began to fade from the landscape. The Deathworlders, in their way, were the last line of defense. They stood as the final beacon of hope in a galaxy that had seen too much bloodshed. With a sharp hiss, the tech specialists activated the final shutdown sequence. The structure groaned in protest, as if it were a living thing, but slowly the energy field around it began to fade. The device powered down with a soft whine, and the ground trembled as the core stabilized. The silence that followed felt more profound than any battle cry. The threat had been neutralized. "We did it," one of the warriors said softly. "It's over." But even as they stood victorious in the belly of the defeated enemy, the cost of their victory was clear. The Deathworlders had lost many of their own. The galaxy had been saved, but only at a great price. Their strength, their resolve, had carried them through. But it had come at the cost of lives, of countless sacrifices. In space, the last of the enemy ships were disabled. The Armada had been scattered, its command structure crumbling under the relentless assault of the Deathworlder fleet. The energy pulses from the planet's surface subsided, the vortex that had once torn through the sky, now a fading memory. The enemy had been shattered. But as the survivors of the battle began to regroup, Admiral Sarah Lockhart stood silently at the command deck, looking out into the vast expanse of space. The fleet was battered, their resources stretched thin, but they had won. The galaxy would live to see another day. But the cost of this victory would echo for generations. "Victory is ours," Sarah said, her voice tired but strong. "But let us not forget the price we paid to earn it. The Deathworlders, the warriors who stood alongside us, they gave everything. We owe them our lives and our future." Captain Harker, aboard his ship, stood by the window, gazing out at the wreckage of the alien fleet. His expression was unreadable, his heart heavy with the weight of the battle. The war had been won, but the warriors who fought it would never be the same. The scars of battle would never fade. The galaxy was saved, yes, but at what cost? As the Deathworlders began to return to their homeworlds, their task was far from over. There were countless wounds to heal, countless lives to rebuild, and memories that would never be erased. The echoes of war would follow them, but the lessons learned would be passed on for generations to come. Humanity had proven itself. The Deathworlders had faced an enemy unlike any before, and they had risen to the challenge. But the greatest question now loomed. What would come next? The galaxy was no longer the same. The Deathworlders had forged a new path, and the galaxy would be forever changed. But there was peace, for now. And though the cost had been high, the fight for survival had made humanity stronger, more united than ever before. They had faced death itself and had emerged victorious. But in the distance, beyond the stars, the silence lingered, the calm before the storm. The war may have been won, but the galaxy's future remained uncertain.